Great to be here. My teenagers don't think I'm cool, obviously. As Shelley said, we're doing a bit of a double act. I'll take you through some of the developments that have happened in drainage, particularly in the Water Corporation, but in partnership with the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. Tim's then going to take you through some very recent developments in policy and position papers, and then I'm going to show you some cool photos to round it off of things that have actually happened on the ground as a result of this change. In summary, parts of this talk we actually gave at the WUSA 2018, Hydropolis 2018 conference in February. So we've adapted some of the slides from that, but we've also got some recent developments and some updates in here as well. So basically, we'll take you through our hypothesis that drainage is a classic wicked problem. We'll talk a little bit more about how we are changing the status quo in drainage management over the last 2 or so years, and what that means through partnering, and then some of the recent shared guidance notes that we've been developing. So a wicked problem in the social science sense is defined as multidisciplinary, difficult, hard to manage, lots of people with lots of different responsibilities, and you make very little progress with traditional problem-solving methods. Drainage particularly, we've got multiple agencies across the state that have responsibility for different aspects of it. Water Corporation manages the main drainage catchments, so big drains, across around half of the metro area, and some drainage in the southwest and Great Southern rural districts. We don't necessarily have a clear link between land planning and drainage and therefore water quality outcomes. We've got lots of legacy old contamination issues throughout the drains and nobody really responsible for water quality. We've got in the Water Corporation and in council drains a combination of open and closed channels, open channels and closed pipes, which makes the systems quite difficult to model and therefore understand and fix problems. In Perth, particularly in the Swan Coastal Plain, we have in some areas, very shallow groundwater, which means that a lot of our drains, if the base of them is low enough, are actually draining groundwater and moving it around. So, and in some cases that's not necessarily a problem, but it does add to the complexity of the system. So in a water or a pure hydraulic sense, it's not a closed hydraulic system. So when our colleagues at the Water Corporation model the water system, for example, the water supply system, they know how much is coming in and they know what the losses and leakages are and they know how much we sell our customers and Bob's your uncle. You can really easily plan for that. Drainage not so. So as an open physical system, it makes it quite complex to manage. And as I said, we've got multiple stakeholders, multiple different expectations. Obviously, drainage is there for a purpose. It's there to allow development and not have flooding. But we also want to have nice natural water features in the landscape, like rivers and streams and wetlands. So how do we balance those two complicated expectations? So for wicked problems, traditional approaches don't work. So traditional approaches where everybody just agrees what the problem is and you just take an engineering approach and you just fix it, doesn't necessarily work. And you need to shift your thinking from a pure solution mode to the ongoing long-term, maybe small iterative interventions while tracking your long-term strategy and your long-term outcomes. So, I took this job just over 2 years ago and I had quite a few raised eyebrows like, drainage? Water Corp does drainage? Why do we even need drainage? It hasn't rained in Perth since 1996. Why would you worry about it? Now these are relatively recent photos. All of these are in the last 5 or 6 years. These are metropolitan Perth streets. The big one on the right-hand side is in Fremantle. So if we get a combination of a high tide and a big rainfall event, we actually turn Freo into Venice, which, would be nice if we had gondolas. But it's highly, really, really inconvenient for the businesses, costs a lot of money to mop up and clean up. And the other two photos are in, the top one's in CBD and the bottom one is in southwest region, I believe. But, so we do occasionally have events where drainage is absolutely needed. And we know also that climate change is going to be causing more extreme, more frequent events of this nature. So our current infrastructure might not cope. The other thing I did when I first took the job, and so I'm the asset manager at the Water Corporation for Drainage, I went out on site and had a look at a few of my assets, and I peered through a fence on that one, the one below. That's actually taken through the chain mesh fence, and I looked at this drain and I went, you know, as asset manager, I'm not particularly proud of that. That looks pretty terrible. So if I'm going to go home and tell my kids what I do, or my parents, you know, explain to mum and dad what you do, I manage drainage, and I show them that, it's like, that's not that flash hot. Surely we can do better, was what I thought. And I think we can. So these two are actually Water Corp drains. That one's a developer's drain, so I'm not claiming that as ours, but it's not atypical. So in parallel with taking on this job a couple of years back, there was a review of what options government had for managing drainage. So this was a joint review between the Water Corporation and Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. And I won't take you through all the process stuff of how we got here, but the findings were really interesting. And the findings were based on lots of workshops and lots of consultation, and also I had to have a look at the literature around what management models you should use, because everybody said you need to reform drainage, you need to reform institutional arrangements. Something needs to be different about your institutions who manage drainage. And what we found was, because it is a complex problem, there is no perfect institutional or governance model for drainage. You can slice it up and dice up different responsibilities, and if you don't fundamentally change the way you approach drainage problems, you'll still get the same outcomes. One of the other big findings was there have been several MOUs, and probably some people in this room have been involved over the last 25 years or so in development of an MOU on drainage or water quality or management of water assets. And a lot of time and a lot of investment in intellectual work has gone into developing MOUs that have been, you know, 50 to 80 pages long, legalistic, lots of goodwill and good intention, and then they've sat on a shelf, and a couple of years later someone has said we need to do another MOU. So it was pretty clear that those sorts of approaches weren't getting the outcomes that we all, as institutions and stakeholders, were really keen on having. So we thought, well, we need to break this nexus of MOUs and institutional arrangements fix everything. They don't, we know that. So culture change and changes in approach were really clearly needed. And we also found very early on, to probably our great surprise, I think if we're honest with ourselves, the two entities that play a large role in managing drainage actually had way more in common than we had differences. We went into our very first workshop assuming Department of Water, as they were then, and Water Corp would be at loggerheads, and that I would be chairing a meeting that people were going to be punching each other by the end of it. And you know, based on 20-something years of history, that was not an unreasonable assumption. So we began the conversation about what we actually had in common and what we thought we could achieve together. And the recent work by the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities provides us with a model for a water sensitive city. And we put this up and actually agreed that we could all sign up to this. Both agencies were actually pretty keen on this. And if we use this as our starting point, we actually, like I said, found that we had a lot more in common, and we could use this as the basis for all of our discussions and all of our positions on different issues. And it became a really useful way to move the discussions forward. So with that shared vision came, I guess, some revelations around what was possible. And I think this is where I was going to throw over to Tim to talk us through our partnering agreement.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Suze.
Tag. So yeah, totally agree with what Suze said there. And this is, how much do you think this would be worth legalistically, Suzanne? Not much. The whole point of the exercise was to sort of capture the essence of a good relationship. How could we work together? There were all these things we agreed to. But that shared vision was very, very important. It allowed us to get beyond a sort of a compliance approach. I mean, vegetation in drains. I think there's a few people in the room here who've been working in this area for a long time, and they would say to you, that'll never happen. Well, here it is, and this partnership agreement is a very, very key way of doing it, because it outlines what it is we're trying to achieve, the principles by which that happens. How do we behave with each other? So there's no more snookering, there's no more sort of, sort of clashing over things. We sit down and we work through them towards that common goal that was mentioned. Not that familiar with this slide, Suzanne, but it does point out, I guess, the importance of the index that's been done by the Collaborative Research Centre for Water Sensitive Cities. And it talks about sort of some of the priority areas and how we benchmark against other cities in Australia and around the world. And it starts to point out that where we're heading with the new direction lines up with these sorts of pieces of work. And I guess the other thing I'm undertaking, we are undertaking a fair bit of work with things like Metronet at the moment. And you start to look at the infill and precinct development that occurs surrounding those stations and lines, and you start to understand with infill development, where is the land left? And a lot of the answer is the infill areas that are around Morley, Midland, Armidale, Canning. Anyone understand where I'm going? These are all drainage districts. So this drainage infrastructure that was designed for conveyance into the future holds a very, very important role in terms of livability and spaces. More on that later. So what does this mean? I think in the past it's fair to say there was probably frustration with all concerned about same organisations within one water portfolio coming up with different advice. That's actually understandable if one group is working towards conveyancing and one is really concerned about water quality. But when you rack it up a bit and you start to look at the shared vision of transforming to a water sensitive city, all of a sudden it all starts to make sense, and that there can be alignment of technical information and things like that. So as the Department of Water and Environment and Conservation person, I need to recognise that Suzanne, as the asset owner, has her headaches and things as well. So it's not just about one of us getting our way, it's about understanding that each other has to have a certain role, but that in working towards that shared vision, we can achieve a lot. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about some technical notes that are sort of coming up for release. It's sort of in progress, but it's an example to demonstrate, because it's all good to talk, but you've got to walk the walk. And Suzanne's going to talk about sort of walking the walk in terms of demonstration later on. I'm going to talk about some of that technical advice and how we're moving towards common platforms on technical guidance. So, here we are at the launch of the Livability program. This must be my drainage suit, Suzanne. I think I've got the same one. Different tie at least, guys, so let's move on. But a very exciting thing, and there's been a lot of energy about it, and this is on the banks of the wetland next to the old Bunnings in Morley, and there'll be more on that later. So, but this guidance, we have released one, and there are another 4 in the pipeline of technical guidance. They're a short outline, that it's not a manual approach, but it does sort of start to talk about how we're going to enhance the value of drainages in these communities. So the first one was living streams, and that's I've never seen a reaction to a guideline like that. It certainly captured people's imaginations, and now we have another 4 coming through about things like stormwater management practices. So the department released the decision process for stormwater last year, and so there'll be a bit of sort of things like that on it. But it's again working towards that shared vision of transforming Perth to a water sensitive city. So this is the one I was just referring to, and it sort of outlines that people are wanting to do things to water corporation assets. That if you look at this sector, we're in a much better position to get what you want approved and things like that through processes. So it's about trying to refine the approach. And as you can see, it goes through a series of different points. And this is another one that's in draft. So that one, the first one's released. And this is the next one sort of coming through. And as you can see, it's about the at-source approach to stormwater that's contained within the decision process. And I think it's fair to say that the business as usual approach is probably not going to deliver us a water sensitive city in the future. We've got to think about how we manage our stormwater. We've got to think about the receiving water bodies and try and consider the sort of water quality aspects of the stormwater. It's not just about conveyancing. So we're looking to release another sheet, another technical guidance that is based on the decision process for stormwater. And it's about increasing the water residency time in your stormwater system to try and mimic pre-development flows. And you're parking water along the way, was the way Bill used to explain it to, wasn't it, Bill? And if we can do that, because there's a lot of people starting to get concerned about things like how much POS that drainage infrastructure takes up. More on that later. But here's an approach that looks after the water quality that I was just referring to. So it's about capturing the contaminants and trying to treat them and mimic natural processes to achieve it. And that way, those nutrients and contaminants aren't just transported down the line to the receiving water bodies. So we're wanting to see that decision process, and as usual, always happy to work with local government, developers, consultants, the works. But it starts to outline the joint approach and the technical guidance for that decision process. So that'll be coming up. The other one in there, I just sort of, okay, that's all right. There's another new one that we're working on, and sort of, I think I probably should change that title, model use outcomes. I think it makes more sense if we refer that as stormwater integration into the public open space that I was just referring to. So, if we design our stormwater systems, and if we just sort of collect up all that water from the hard sand and send it down to the end of the line, and if that then ends up in a basin within public open space at the bottom, that's going to be large infrastructure. So people will start to get concerned with that. That's not what the Department and the Water Corporation are trying to say. By using the methodologies and techniques we referred to in the previous slide, we showed how the water can be put into swales and rain gardens and other water-sensitive urban design techniques along the way. And I think so, even though we're doing that for water quality reasons, I do think there is bonuses in terms of how we fit these stormwater systems into public open space. There will be gains. I know for a fact that local government is a bit worried about some of the sizes of infrastructure in POS. I think by issuing this technical guidance, we're actually trying to look at, how can we go about that? And this will contain shared information that is signed off by both the Water Corporation and the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation to achieve that outcome. So the info sheet, the technical guidance, uses the framework for public open space released by the Department of Recreation and Sport. And I think that's the reason I'm bringing that up is we do get a lot of, we can't afford to slot water sensitive urban design into our development. We haven't got the space, it's too constrained, we've got this, we've got that, we've got the other. I think it's important that before we make those comments, that we actually consider the objective of the park, because there's CRC has released research that sort of shows that having the stormwater systems and the water sensitive urban design integrated into the public open space is a net beneficial thing. It's a good thing. So again, we're wanting to put this information out there so that we can sort of start to think about how we go about things, not just consider conveyance, consider the water quality, consider the objectives of a piece of land first. And I don't think it's a matter of shoehorning water sensitive urban design. If we consider these things up front, we can probably achieve a lot more, and I think the community will thank us for it. So that'll be another information note that we release. So that's my little spiel. I'm going to hand you back to Suzanne. Grab my stuff, there it is.
So I guess the purpose of today was to talk through a couple of different aspects of the Drainage for Livability program, and I guess if you take a couple of key messages away, one is it's a change in behaviour and a change in approach between the two agencies. It's not new science. The science has been around for years about the benefits of water sensitive urban design and proper integration of blue-green infrastructure into harder infrastructure like roads and streetscapes and that sort of thing. So it's not about the science of water sensitive urban design, it's about the approach that the two agencies are taking and documenting those approaches in joint guidance notes. I think, well, we know it's been really well received by developers and by councils. The reaction to the very first one on a joint approach to living streams was really well received. Particularly because we got the graphic artist to put some vegetation in the base flow channel, and I think that was probably the single biggest breakthrough in the Water Corporation in 50 years of drainage management. Going, yeah, it doesn't actually cause World War III, and if we go out and have a look at any of our drains, they've already got weeds and crap growing in the base flow anyway, so keeping good stuff out makes no sense at all. Well vegetated drains are well managed, and if you plant deliberate sedges, you're obviously keeping the weeds and stuff out. So a couple of key messages. The documentation of the joint approach is really important, and getting the message out to developers and to councils about the new approach on those documents is really critical. The other part of it is, of course, the conversion of actual physical infrastructure. And so I'm just going to take you through some photos of stuff that's happened in the last 12 months or so, and then some ideas for things that we're going to do, and then maybe some kooky off-the-planet ideas that would be lovely, but I don't know if we'll do it. So this is Brentwood Main Drain, where it pops out next to Leach Highway, opposite the Bull Creek RAF village. And so you can see the before photo. That was a buried pipe, and it was pretty ordinary bit of kind of waste ground, basically, next to Leach Highway runs sort of from the bottom of the picture to the top of the picture. So we're looking east, and there's, you know, residences and a big wall, and then if you go around this corner a little bit further, it pops out into the Canning River. So the pipe was, and I hate using this word because it's a verb that's been nouned, a noun that's been verbed, it's been daylighted. So the pipe was dug up and a head wall built, and so it comes out from under a road here, so it still had to have a pipe here, but then it pops out and then there's this beautiful stream that's been created. This was a partnership project with DBCA, City of Melville, Water Corporation, Circle, a real collaborative project that started before the Drainage for Livability program, but it's an amazing example of what you can do if you focus your efforts and energies as a bunch of organisations wanting to achieve the same thing. The reason I put it up is that I know that some of the approvals through Water Corporation and just the coordination took a very long time, and we also have anecdotal stories from other local authorities that tried to do cool things like this in water corp drains. One in particular took 7 years. Now, I worked on the Southern Seawater Desal project a couple of years back, the big one down near Binningup, and we took 2 years to get through all of the EPA, state EPA and federal environmental approvals. If we can do that in 2 years, build a 100 gig desal plant, surely we can get a drain converted in less than, you know, let's say a couple of months. Let's be ambitious. The other one, Russell Street, next to the Bunnings. So we have a comp basin. So this is genuinely before. There's a comp basin in amongst those trees. There's a 2 metre tall fence with signs saying "keep out, go away, death, you will die if you enter into this compound." A couple of, you know, pretty ordinary steep-sided trapezoidal drains, one running up that side and one running along the top there, and the basin over here. And then this big sort of wasted opportunity of land. The City of Bayswater approached us and said, "Can we come in and do something on this land? And while we're here, we'll plant the drain out and make it a bit swirly and take the sides down a bit so it's not so steep." So that's taken about 1.5 years to get through all of the approvals and design processes, so not quite meeting my KPI of getting it in a couple of months, but we've got there in the end. This is a computer mock-up, but it's pretty close to what it looks like. So the fence is down. This is all like an adult ninja playground park, so adult exercise equipment. that you clamber up, like on those survival shows where they have to go up, basically grown-up swings and climbing machinery. This actually has a 1.2 metre fence along it at the moment while we get the vegetation established, and also to keep kids out from running through it while the veg is being established. But it has, that side has been dropped down. This light industrial park along here has, at the moment, as you can see, some rather attractive graffiti, and there's a project that's about to commence to paint a mural, so get the local high school involved and do some local street art. And if you cross the road here, there's the Morley Busport and the Galleria Shopping Centre. So the reason behind the project was the council came to us and said, you know, we're running out of public open space in the city of Bayswater, and particularly the Morley city centre area. It's becoming more and more built up, and around here is light industrial at the moment, but it's earmarked potentially for medium-sized development. There's just nowhere for these people to go and recreate. Once they're living here in medium density development, there'll be no parks for them to you know, nearby parks anyhow. So it's turned out to be quite a good outcome in terms of water quality by, you know, getting some vegetation along here. These drains run eventually down into the Swan River. Water quality, amenity, parks and gardens, and recreational space. This one's in Yokine, so this is just one side of it, but there's a basin, a compensating basin here, and again an empty bit of land and a 2 metre fence around the entire site. Most of our fences also, I shouldn't say this, but they have little holes and things in them. There's evidence that people are already accessing them, so we know that people are already coming into these pieces of land, but they're coming in unauthorised or potentially unsafely. So this had quite a steep side, so the council's come along and flattened that out, and they're going to plant it. And we've just fenced the very steepest bit here. We've put a 1.2 metre fence just here, just so nobody vulnerable like small children or perhaps elderly people might accidentally stumble over that bit. But the fence around the outside of the perimeter is going to come down. In fact, it has come down. So again, opening up the space and allowing people closer to a water body safely, so having less steep sides and fencing the very steepest bits, but only low fences, not high security razor wire, keep out little diamonds. This is a potential project, so this hasn't yet happened. Still fingers crossed. The old Brearley Ave, as you drove down to the domestic airport, used to go down Brearley Avenue, and there's a drain on the right-hand side. Probably being water professionals, obviously you already know that. You drive down Brearley Ave, if you look to your right, you can see a big trapezoidal ugly waterport drain. The opportunity when redeveloping this precinct around the, calling it Redcliffe Station or the Perth Airport Station, is to open space and have swales and water features and living streams, that sort of thing. So we're super keen on that, and there's obviously Mike there and the Minister and people from PTA and Metronet. So we're using this picture as a bit of pressure on Metronet and PTA to follow through on actually getting this happening. This is a project that is hoping to get constructed before winter sets in. So this actually looks quite nice already. This is a before picture, but we have a drain and it's not fenced, it's in a public open space already, but you can see there's wooden toe protection that runs along the side here. Now parts of it are missing or broken or just gone completely along there. The local council there wants to remove the toe protection and just make that a little bit less steep. Obviously leaving vegetation where it is, not taking out the trees, but just making it a gentler sort of transition from park to stream back up to the park rather than it being. So it doesn't have to be big projects, it can be quite a small change to properly integrate and have a seamless transition into waterways. Other example, these are the weird and wacky ones. So this is, I mean, I'm a cyclist, so if I see linear infrastructure like a drain with a big piece of land next to it and a fence around it, why can't we put a bike path along there? So this is something my colleague Jason found, pump track. So you don't pedal, you install this stuff in modular things that snap together like Lego, and you use the camber to get either the bike or the scooter going. So we're sort of showing councils this and going, maybe you could install it, and you can take it away. So if it's a piece of land that might be inundated for a couple of weeks a year during high rainfall periods in winter, you could take it all out and pop it back in for the other 11 months. This is in New York. This was an old railway that has been converted and planted and has got green infrastructure. So not necessarily blue infrastructure, but if you've got linear infrastructure that you're not using anymore, this is another example. This is in Mexico, again, and we saw a really good example of this at the Hydropolis conference from Melbourne, where they've converted an old sewer, brick sewer that they can't remove because it's got heritage value, but they've planted around it and turned it into this beautiful linear park. And again, this is an old gas pipeline that's being converted into, you know, a mixture of land uses, but a green sort of ribbon through a really highly developed area that otherwise wouldn't have that sort of infrastructure. So this is Brentwood again, and I love this one because it's, you know, you can't even see art drain. You see bits of water and then it pops around again, and then there's bundies, and the day we opened it, there was just kids everywhere and they're all running through it, and our security manager would have had a heart attack. But, you know, that's my childhood as well, growing up in Guildford and going down to the river and mucking around in the shallows and catching frogs and tatties and getting muddy and told off by my mum. So that's, you know, that's really why we're doing this, that we can see that there is so much potential in converting those really ugly trapezoidal waterways into something really beautiful. But through a mixture of on-ground projects and joint guidance and standing together as two agencies when we're advising councils or developers or consultants to developers, and taking that shared vision and turning it into something like this. So that's it from us, I guess. We're very happy to take questions or discussion or disputes or...
Well, there's got to be at least one question.
Yeah.
Right, that's it.
Well,
so we did a conversion of Main Drain through Wandi, and that took 7 years as well, so you can add that to